Welcome to the Rock is George podcast. I'm your host, George Dionne, and this is episode 161. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to hit like, follow, or subscribe on the platform that you're listening to us on. You can also check out my work at the loudest.com on the planet, knac.com, for exclusive hard rock and heavy metal interviews, live show coverage, and more. My guest for this episode is trumpet legend Mac GOLLEHON. He's played with such big acts as Duran Duran, Hall & Oates, Chaka Khan, Nile Rodgers, David Bowie, Madonna, the list goes on and on and on. Mac has also released several solo albums over the years, several collaborations. If you have the time, check out the history of Mac GOLLEHON on Discogs or on Wikipedia. On September 29th, Mac released his latest album, Bite of the Street, through Nefarious Industries. This album is released under the moniker of Mac GOLLEHON and the Hispanic Mechanics. More on that in the interview. And here's Mac GOLLEHON to tell you more about it. If I knew absolutely nothing about Mac GOLLEHON and the Hispanic Mechanics, how would you describe your music to me?
This particular record, this new one, particular record really is very groove oriented, very, very in the pocket, very groove oriented. Harmonically, it's not the complexity of, let's say, the last two records that I did of, say, like The End is the Beginning, not like that, but it's also a lot of energy, a lot of high energy, very upbeat, a lot of groove type stuff. And it's got a Latin thing to it, but then again, it's also got a fusiony sound to it. It's also got a little bit of jazz influence to it. Of course, anytime you play a note on a horn, it's going to have that anyway also, So yeah, it's definitely in a sonic zone by itself.
Your current album that we're talking about is Bite of the Street. It came out today, September 29th on Nefarious Industries. I listened to your prior album. I listened to this album. The End is the Beginning seemed a little more dark. This Bite of the Street seems more celebratory, upbeat, like a party.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Did you want to come from, where you made that dark album? You wanted to do something kind of on the opposite end with Bite of the Street?
No. Here's what happened. The Bite of the Street was actually recorded before the pandemic. So it was really recorded before. So the other record came out afterwards. And of course, I guess maybe the pandemic might have affected the mood of the record as well. But there was The End is the Beginning was more of a search for the early 70s like film noir sound, and the sound of the street, the sound of New York, the vibe of, like, let's say, French Connection, this type of thing, and that was the way it worked. The Hispanic Mechanics record, Bite of the Street, was really recorded with a whole different purpose in mind. It was just songs that we'd been doing in clubs and stuff. We'd played a few times in some clubs, and we went to the studio and basically just did it with some overdubs later on, of course. And then, but yeah, it was reverse order, really. This was really done about 3 years ago, but it's one of those records we had to get it out. It's like, okay, we got to get this out now, because it's 3 years old already.
Was there a reason that you particularly held onto it and released in The End is the Beginning first?
No real reason, just accepted the other things were done also. The other things were done and ready to go. There was the album we did with David Brenner, Grid Failure, and in collaboration with me, and the Dismemberment Cabaret, which developed because I was playing in my hallway for the neighbors, and I was playing in the stairway for the neighbors, and that went in a different. He saw YouTube of that and said, "Okay, well, we should do something with that." And so I started sending him tracks, and he was doing tracks that he was working on, and then we put them together, and piece by piece, the conception built up. I was using a lot of these old music that had a prohibition type sound to them. and very antique mutes from the 20s and early 30s. And it developed a personality. And of course, he did his thing he was doing, and it was a whole thing different entirely. He said, well, it's got that sound a little bit like a cabaret, but not really. So that's eventually how we came up with the name, the Dismemberment Cabaret, which is pretty wild. And then, of course, the next one we worked on, which we recorded live in at his house and the compound there, and we did that in basically 3 days, and that was recorded just all me in the studio. Dave was engineering and mixing, and then he added the sound effects and things. They gave the piece a vibe more like a film score, and that's how that transpired little by little. So okay, let's put this out, and then it was good timing to like build things up again, and then time for Bite of the Street after that.
Fair enough. So timeline wise, you do this project with David Brenner, Grid Failure, and then from there he ends up producing The End is the Beginning, working with you on that. And now we're out doing Bite of the Street, which you said you recorded traditionally in the studio. Is that something that you do regularly while other musicians kind of stick to the computer these days?
A little of both, but I do really like being in the studio. I really like that. Right now, I'm in Fox Grove studio, the Fox Grove down on Mercer Street, and going to do a recording after this with David Maurice. And yeah, I really like being in the studio. I like that.
When you're constructing an instrumental album, I would imagine that coming up with song titles isn't exactly easy, or maybe it is for you.
It's easy. Yeah, it's easy. I always have things that I'm thinking about, and there's always things that come to mind. The hardest part is to edit the titles, or to edit the thought, and to get it narrowed down to one or two things, or one thing instead of five or six. You know, it's train of thought goes faster than what's really feasible. So sometimes I have to slow myself down and focus on, okay, it's going to be either this or that. What's the title for this or that? And come up with some pretty wild titles sometimes. Yeah.
Are you the kind of guy that writes the piece of music and then tries to come up with a title, or do you sort of have that feeling or story in your head and write the music after that? That's something that I've interviewed Joe Satriani. He says he has the story first and then does the music.
Yeah, I would go with that too. The story is there. The story's there. The music is always there all the time. It's like, can't shut it off. The music is always going on, and just can't shut that off. Sometimes I just have to make myself shut that off. I'm hearing things all the time, not even a keyboard. I don't even use a keyboard to write. I don't use a computer or a keyboard, nothing. It's just in the head. So I'll sit down, I'll start writing things. I'll have a concept, or I have a story in mind, or whatever feeling I want to project. And that comes from an accumulation of a lot of stuff. Sometimes it's overkill, just like the titles. Sometimes I come in with 5, 6, sometimes even 10 times more material than what I really need. But now I eventually just start editing things down, take some of the catalog out, reorder things, get rid of some stuff, strip it down, put it back together, reassemble, and then even strip it down from there. So it's really, once again, a thing of excess. So too much excess doesn't really succeed. I have to keep filing it down, keep filing it down until we come up with something that really works. And that's the process for me, is basically editing.
You've got 3 promotional videos out from Bite of the Street, Sold Out, High Drama, Sleepwalker. Interesting, very artistic videos. Do you come up with the concepts yourself, or do you have other people working with you?
No, Dave Grid Failure was working with me on that, and also the first one we did quite a bit of research and talking about what we were going to do on that. And then another one was where Tyler Adams did the first video, High Drama. There was a lot of stuff in that one, and that was shot in an old mansion in Staten Island. And then Michael Bauman, we went up to his place and added some additional footage for High Drama, And so I collaborate with the photographer, the videographer. Of course, me and Dave are always talking about, that's grid failure. We're always talking about things that would be interesting to do, throwing ideas across and putting things together. And that's basically how these things develop. The videos.
Now, in one particular video, I saw you playing trumpet outside a graveyard. Are there any passersby that are looking at you guys like you're crazy?
They didn't even notice us.
Well, it is New York.
That's right. They didn't even notice. Yeah. One time I did some shots coming up. There was they were doing maintenance. I did some shots where I climbed out of the sewer line, right? I climbed out of the sewer pipe playing with all that steam and everything. Nobody even noticed it. But we some reason we weren't able to use the footage. It just wasn't clear enough to see. It was just a big foggy smoke, you know. So yeah, nobody notices anything here.
Bite of the Streets coming out on Nefarious Industries, which a lot of your material comes out on. Is this your record label, or is it David's, or is it someone else's?
Yeah, it's not my label. No, it's David Brenner GRIDFAILURE producing, and then there's Greg also. Greg is the head of the label. That's Greg Meisenberg, and he's actually the owner of the label. So he's very instrumental at the putting together the technical formats at the end and getting everything all lined up, and very, very precise and very precision guy at that also. So it's basically his label, and he's busy quite often. He plays in several different bands, and he's on the road quite a bit, you know, so he keeps himself really busy.
So I've seen you build as Matt GOLLEHON, and I've seen you build currently as Matt GOLLEHON and the Hispanic Mechanics. So where does the Hispanic Mechanics come into the fold here?
Hispanic Mechanics basically started around 2014. Around 2014, it was a band that I put together, and the name of the band kind of developed by accident. I was playing at this place as a supper club. The Red Rooster up in Harlem had a supper club down in the basement. Jenny's Supper Club, I think it was. And we had a gig there, and you know, worked it out and everything, and we filled up the place. And of course, I had like about 8 musicians in the band. And when you're dealing with 8 or 9 guys, you know, everybody thinks that they're the only ones that have a problem. So everybody comes to you at the last minute. I need this, I need that. Blah, blah, blah. Oh man, could you get me a beer? Could, you know, anything, get me a beer? Oh man, could you man, I don't have a white t-shirt, man, you know, whatever, you know, black t-shirt. Everybody comes up. So I was like, the announcer came up to me and he says, "How do you pronounce your name again?" I said, "Matt GOLLEHON," right? So then I'm having all these musicians come up to me. "Hey man, what's the order of the set list?" You know, and hey, what's this? What's that? You know, things that they do to band leaders. So finally the announcer comes up. "How do you say that name again?" I said, "Matt GOLLEHON." He said, "Okay." Then 3 minutes later comes up to, "Tell me your name again." I said, "I'll whisper it to you right before I go on, right before you say it." He said, "Well, no, I want to have it down." So finally, he asked me about 3 more times, but everybody else asked me for things. "How do you say your name? How do you say your name?" I says, "Just call them the Hispanic Mechanics." And that's how the name developed, just for that gig. And then it stuck. And then he announced it, the Hispanic Mechanics, and the audience like busted out laughing. They thought it was hilarious, you know, it was like, or a great name, or you know, they reacted to it, and the name just kind of stuck and it stayed with me, you know.
That's actually a pretty cool story. I like that.
Yeah, yeah. So that was a record recorded in 2015, Matt GOLLEHON and Hispanic Mechanics, and then of course this one. And you know, going forward, it could very well be that, you know, there'll be a merging of some of the other artists from the Nefarious label. We've been talking about it, and merge some of the other bands that have some similar interests or similar concepts and sound, or even contrasting that might work, and to do gigs together with various artists from the label and do that as well. So, you know, it's always a growth process.
I noticed you had a CD release party this week in New York at the Hard Swallow. How did that go?
Right. Went good. Yeah. It was, had a good turnout. people really enjoyed it. The band sounded nice, and everything went well. It was just a short set. It was 45 minutes, and we got enough done that it was got the record out there, and people saw the record, and we got enough done that it had some results from it. So it was really good. Yeah.
So when it comes to live performances, are you just basically keeping it local, like playing on the weekends like a normal club band, or do you have intentions to go out beyond New York?
No. It's right now. It's got to be during the weekdays, because during the weekends I got to do other stuff to try to make money, until we get this thing going. But my idea is to get this thing going for festivals, bigger places, so that way, yeah, you can do it on the weekends, and it's some bigger venues. And that would be the goal, of course, to get involved, booked in some of the festivals and museums, cultural affairs, cultural events, all sorts of different things. Right now it's confined to the smaller clubs, but it's a growth process. I mean, the Hispanic mechanics haven't played in a while, so it's time to get back out there and get it going again. And as I say, merging with different people from the label too, trying to get some different things going with that in bigger venues.
You got to hit up some breweries. Those are like ripe for this kind of music.
Breweries, wineries, exactly. Mm-hmm.
You do studio work for Nefarious Industries. You work with other artists within the label.
Yes, I played on some of the other records too, with some of the other artists on the label. Because one of them came out with a release today that's a lot like a movie soundtrack. Very soundtrack. And of course, we have our release today, and playing with several different people there. And then I end up recording with various people. I've been in the business a long time, so I know a lot of people. I end up recording with various people several times a week, mostly recording. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was looking at your resume. It's quite extensive over the last 30 years or so, and I couldn't even touch the surface with it talking with you for like a half an hour or so.
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff. It's somewhere in the neighborhood around 3,000, a little over 3,000 records or so now. And it's funny, way back in the day, people used to tell me, let me give you a word of advice, young man. If you were more well-behaved, you'd work a lot more. I said, well, 3 or 4 records a day is enough for me right now. And I'm having fun, so I'm not going to adjust my mannerisms,
How did you first get started with the trumpet? Was it something in like high school band class and then it evolved from there?
Well, trumpet was actually about the last instrument that I really plowed into full steam. I started out clarinet, saxophone, and then I went to guitar for quite some time. Of course, piano all along. You had to have basic functional piano skills. And so all along, the trumpet was in there. And I didn't really start focusing on it as much until I was around 13, and I went on the road with a circus band. So I was playing first trumpet with a circus, and that's when just trial by fire, get in there doing it and doing all those tough shows. And right away you develop a knack for it and a certain amount of skill set for it. And then after that, playing in jazz bands, playing blues bands, all purpose kind of things. And then of course, the music school. And then I went the big band circuit. Buddy Rich was one of the big bands I played with in late 70s. And then came to New York. And when I first came to New York, it was my intention was really just get involved in some of the jazz things. I wanted to play with Art Blakey. I wanted to play with maybe Horace Silver, Charlie Mingus, and this sort of thing. And that's what I was going for. I ended up playing a lot of the downtown scene, the punk things, the CBGBs, and some of the other clubs, 10 Palace, and some of the more esoteric jazz things. And one thing just kind of led to another. And I ended up being on one disco record right after another. I mean, just one right after another. And then that led to the playing on a lot of R&B records, and then which led into playing a lot of pop records. And at the same time, I was playing on a lot of Latin and salsa records and soca, calypso, reggae, just all across the boards, and then remixes. it just turned into a very wide scene, covered a lot of different types of music. So that's how it really developed, was like that. And it just kind of took a life of its own before, 10 or 12 years went by and was recording all the time.
Now, you weren't just a studio musician back in the day. You actually went out on the road with a couple bands. I saw you've gone out with Hall & Oates and Shaka Khan, and you did a pretty big run with Duran Duran after working
Right.
on albums Notorious and The Big Thing.
Yeah, they were great guys. I really enjoyed being with them. They were a lot of fun. They were cool. They were like, yeah, they were really good guys. I liked them a lot.
Now, was working with Duran Duran what led you to kind of your long relationship with Nile Rodgers of CHIC? I noticed you worked on several albums with him.
Uh-huh. Well, I'd say I've been on maybe 25 of his records, but the association with him started, I'd say more like 1980, probably like 1980s when it started with him. Yeah, that was before. So that would have been around the Sister Sledge years, something like that, and that basically came from being in another studio doing some disco recording, and then somebody heard me from that, and it ended up, uh, I think one of the bigger records. Well, there were several big ones, though. Yeah, one of them that stands out was the David Bowie "Let's Dance" record, and that was around 1980, 82 or 83, somewhere around there. And I was that almost didn't happen because I was on tour. I was in Houston, Texas, and I was doing some gigs with Nelson Riddle, and just did the Linda Ronstadt things that he did for Linda Ronstadt standard songs, and so I was down there with him, and I ended up staying for 2 or 3 days longer. And in those days, you didn't have a cell phone, of course. And what ended up happening was I checked my telephone answering device where you put it up to the phone and it goes beep like that. And then so you have 14 new messages. And it was people trying to get a hold of me to do the David Bowie recording at Power Station, Let's Dance. So I made it up just in time. I went right from the airport right to the recording studio. Got there like 10 o'clock in the morning, something like, which was earlier than I needed to be, but I got there early, and that's how it happened. I made it in time.
So when you get a call like that to go to the studio to record on a David Bowie song, is Bowie there, or is this after he's done all his stuff?
Oh no, he was there. Yeah, he was there. He was very much part of it. Yeah, he was very active in it and very vocal about what he wanted, and very precise about explaining what he wanted. And yeah, oh yeah, he was very much there. Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, one of the times I got there, he was there. Me and him arrived at the same time. The first day we were both way too early because he didn't want to miss it, and I didn't want to miss it either. And because I came right from the airport and hung out and had a long talk before the thing even started, a couple of hours there in the lobby. And then, yeah, but no, he was very, very immersed in every aspect of it.
Now, how for these particular studio projects that you worked on back then with David Bowie and Billy Ocean and Blondie and even the rap band Onyx, were you working for the studio and that's how they knew to kind of go to you, or was it the producers that knew you, or some other kind of connection that they're like, oh, we got to get Mac for this one?
Yeah, it was never anything to do with just a particular studio. No, never was that. It was more to do with just being out there all the time, just being out there working on. I mean, somebody heard me talking about it the other days, and they heard me say, "Yeah, I was doing 2 or 3 records a day back in the day." And somebody else said, "No, man, you weren't doing 2 or 3 records a day. You're doing 3 and 4 and 5 records a day." And I started thinking about it. Well, I was, yeah. The more I think about it, yeah, it was a lot of times, and it's just, it was it was a thing. You're just caught up in it at that time, and just one thing leads to another, and people talk about you, people say things, people mention, oh yeah, he was just on this. You need to use this guy. He just on this, and people recommend you word of mouth. Producers, sometimes sometimes other managers from other things that we worked on, other record labels sometimes. Rarely, very rarely ever from the musicians, especially horn players. It ain't going to come from that. Matter of fact, quite the opposite. I didn't come in through the usual ranks. You know, a lot of guys, they worked them through horn players. They would work their way in with the horn section guys, and they would work their way up through the ranks and be a second player, a third player, be a sub, whatnot. I didn't do any of that. I just, because I knew that wasn't going to be any way to last if you're beholden to somebody owing favors or anything. So, yeah, a lot of people were pretty worried when I came into the scene. They were worried about their job security. They were worried about what was going to be in it because I had a different sound. My sound was different than theirs, all of them, every one of them, very different. I blended well with the electronic thing that was happening, the synthesizer thing. It blended well. I was able to do right on the spot arrangements without writing anything down. All of these sort of things that weren't really in the generation right before me. They usually come in and there's music charted out, written out. Things are pretty much mapped out. Everybody sits. This is your chair. This is that chair. My thing was about nothing to do with any of that. And that's why they say if I was better behaved, I would have been on those big guy sessions too. But I didn't really even care about that. I didn't care about any of it at the time. I just wanted to be out there playing music, and I was wanting to be more of a jazz thing and do the rock and roll stuff I was doing downtown. And I had no desire whatsoever to really be a studio musician. It just happened. But luckily, it sort of happened on my terms a little bit. I wasn't really beholden to anybody or anything. And it just transpired, it took on a life of its own, really.
Now, I personally don't know if there's different trumpets and styles of trumpets out there, but is there a particular brand or style that you favor when you're either performing live or in the studio?
Mm-hmm. Well, the fact is, pretty much anything at work, it's all about you. It's your physical material. It's your physical material. You know, your body, your facial structure. More than anything, your mental concept of sound, what you want or what's going to fit the particular project, what's going to fit the record, what's going to fit the musical environment that you're in. The horns are they're pretty close. The manufacturers they got it down. They're pretty close. There's some that are better than others. Some that may be different than others. Maybe some of them have a slightly heavier sound, some of them a lighter sound, some of them more piercing, some of them more broad. But the biggest difference, just sonically and equipment, just equipment, other than the hardware that you have in your body, is the mouthpiece. And the mouthpiece makes the biggest difference for me as far as the timbre of the sound, the intonation, the center of pitch. All of these things. That's a bigger deal than the actual trumpet would be, or trombone, or flugelhorn, or any of those. Now there will be a big difference between a trumpet and a trombone. There'll be a big difference between a flugelhorn and a trumpet. Sometimes there'll be very little difference in a cornet, a really good cornet, and a trumpet. There'll be very little difference sometimes, you know.
As you mentioned before, Bite of the Street was made prior to the pandemic. So I'd imagine you're working on new music for the next Mac GOLLEHON and the Hispanic Mechanics album.
Yeah, well, it doesn't even necessarily have to be Hispanic Mechanics. It could be something else even. It's yeah, I'm always working on stuff. There's another one being mixed right now that is really very cinematic, very filmic. You know, it's what I'm working on. It's being mixed now, and it's mixed and mastered. It's really very, very cinematic. Even more so than the one before. Than the end is the beginning. Even more so than that one. And there's always stuff, and I'm writing some new stuff right now too. And like I say, I don't use a computer for composing. I don't use the keyboard or anything. I just pull out a piece of paper, old-fashioned score paper, and I just start writing stuff down. Just, you know, it's in the head. catalog. So I write things down without the use of any of that stuff. And there's a lot of paper stacking up. There's stacks of paper now all over.
You mentioned this cinematic music a couple times for outside projects in your next possible album. Have you ever scored for a movie?
Here's the thing. I've written stuff that's in movies, but I got paid to do it. I got a buyout to do it, and I can't really talk about it. A lot of this stuff is got paid to do it and keep your mouth shut, and that's it. A one-time payment on a lot of it. Yeah.
Understandable. I know how that thing can kind of work.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So
those things happen. Not a whole lot. There wasn't a whole lot of it. I mean, I played on quite a bit of stuff, TV and movies and stuff. Played on quite a bit, and of course that's a different thing. You sign a sheet, goes through the union, goes through SAG, goes through all that stuff, and you get paid through that theatrical productions, and you get a check every year for that. Whatever stuff you're on, and that's a whole nother thing. But to actually write for people, and I did have a period where I would do commercials and jingles for people. It was in the 90s, and they'd come in and they would say, "Okay, do you have something in mind?" I would say to them, "Do you have something in mind?" "No, not really." "What would you hear here?" And I'd give them a whole thing. And I went away from too many sessions saying, "Wow, I actually wrote that, though. I actually wrote that. I didn't get any writing credit for it. I didn't get compensated at all." So then I went through a phase where I just went in like blank. I said, "Okay, what do you got? What do you want me to do today?" And then I'd just sit there until they come up with it. A lot of times, they come up with something because for a while I gave up on coming up with the ideas. And then after a while, I started coming up with the ideas even because 2 hours go by, they had nothing. 3 hours went by, they had nothing. I thought, I want to get out of here. I want to get paid and get out of here. So I would come up with something so I could just get out of here and get it done.
That's great.
Yeah.
Before I let you go, I know you're sitting there in the studio right now. What are you going to be working on today?
Well, right now, I'm with David Maurice here at the Foxgrove. I never know what he's going to do. He didn't tell me. I never know, but I know it's going to be a good surprise. He gets great sound, great stuff. So I'm not sure exactly. I think it's going to be a singer that we're working on some music. It seems that way. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. I'm sure we'll find out soon.
Oh, and check out this beautiful microphone here, huh?
Nice.
Yeah, isn't that a beauty? Yeah,
absolutely.
That's from the Abbey Road. That's from the Abbey Road Studios, and that was on one of the Beatles records, actually.
Awesome.
Yeah, beautiful mic.
Nice history right there.
Yeah, he always surprises me. You never know what you're going to be doing, but it'll be something fun, something cool. That's for sure.
Well, those are all the questions I have for you today, Mac. The new Mac GOLLEHON and the Hispanic Mechanics album is Bite of the Street. Came out today, September 29th, Nefarious Industries. I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me about it today, and I wish you the best of luck going forward.
Well, thanks, George. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's been great talking to you.
Once again, I want to thank Mac GOLLEHON for coming on the Rock is George podcast. Be sure to check out the latest album by Mac GOLLEHON and the Hispanic Mechanics called Bite of the Street. It's out now on Nefarious Industries. Head over to your favorite music streaming platform. Take a listen to the album. If you like what you hear, buy a physical copy. Support the artist. For all things Mac GOLLEHON, head over to his official Facebook page, /mac.gollehon. I also want to thank David Brenner of Earsplit PR and Nefarious Industries and Grid Failure for making this interview possible. You've been great. I've been George Dionne. Discover your next favorite artist on the Rock is George podcast.